There we go. Okay, there we go. Good morning, everyone. We are just going to wait a few more minutes for everyone else to trickle on, and then we'll get started. For everyone who's just joined us, we're going to wait about one more minute for everyone to trickle on. Okay, great, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for this climate workshop on a rainy and wet Friday. I hope everyone still has power at their homes, and I'm glad that at least you all do and are able to join us today. So with that, I'm just going to walk us through an agenda to start off, just to frame what we're going to talk about in this discussion today, and then I'll stop sharing screens and we can do some member introductions. So we'll start, as I mentioned, with just some brief introductions, since we're bringing together a group of people who aren't usually together, mixing up all of our committees and task force members and advisory groups. And then I'll just give a brief presentation to overview some of the workshop theme that we're going to be talking about today, some key questions that can kick us off in discussion that I shared with you all last week. And we'll spend most of our time today in a working session to really think through some actions and strategies around this idea of increasing participation in climate action. And then Alison DeJong from the Water Institute is joining me, and she'll be offering up some next steps at the end of this discussion so that we ensure that this is productive and can inform the work of our committees and of this effort more broadly. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing screens in just a second and ask all of you to introduce yourselves, just a name and affiliation, what group you're on in the climate work, and then something you're looking forward to discussing in this conversation today. So I'll stop my screen share now, and I'll call on you as I see you on my screen, so just let me know if I miss anyone. Ernest, you are in my top left corner. Can you kick us off?
Yes, Ernest Gerwar. I'm representing the State Soil and Water Conservation Commission, which oversees the 44 conservation districts in the state.
And Ernest, which group are you on?
Oh, the ag, forestry, and waste.
Thank you, Ernest. Great to have you here. Arthur, you're next to him.
Excuse me. Good morning, everybody. I'm Arthur Johnson with the Center for Sustainable Engagement and Development, New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm on the land use, building, and whatever else the rest of the title is on that point. I'm hoping that we will have some positive impact in relation to how to engage communities more into climate action, and particularly underserved communities and communities of color.
Thank you, Arthur. Great to have you too. Ron.
Ron Harold, Louisiana Farm Bureau. I sit on the Ag, Forestry, Conservation, and Waste Sector Committee. My role and what I'm looking at is agricultural's role in sequestering carbon in particular, and also how agriculture can benefit from this initiative. I mentioned I was on a call yesterday with carbon pricing, which was a very interesting discussion. My perspective right now is that carbon pricing is going to be a key part of whatever we develop for a statewide strategy.
Thank you, Ron, for those opening remarks for us. Wiley, you're right next to him for me. I think you're on mute.
Okay, no, that's it. I'm sorry.
Yep. Finally got it. Takes these old people a little longer sometimes to communicate. Wiley Guilfoyle, Port Director, Lake Providence Port on the Transportation Committee.
Thanks, Wiley. Logan.
Hi there. I'm Logan Burke with the Alliance for Affordable Energy, and I'm on the Power Sector Working Group. And I'm really interested in thinking about how we can be listening to communities and better understanding their needs and matching those up with the kinds of tools and programs that can help us deal with the climate change reality that we're all struggling with.
Those are great ideas to raise, Logan. Bill, you're next on my screen.
Bill Robertson in Shreveport, recently retired after 18 years with the Louisiana Public Service Commission, Office of Foster Campbell, and happy to be here this morning with everyone.
Thank you, Bill. Harry?
Harry Vorhoff with the Governor's Office. I'm on the task force as well as the legal advisory group, and looking forward to this discussion here today, and hoping that we can end this meeting with some real concrete actions that we've developed and identified. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Harry. Dr. Conrad.
Hi, Kevin Conrad here with Ochsner Health. I'm on the Land Use Committee. I'm looking forward to seeing how we can get sectors such as healthcare develop specific goals for their sectors. And that's what brings me to the meeting today. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. Great to have you. Jessica?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessica Kemp with the Center for Planning Excellence. I'm on the Transportation Committee. And I guess one of the things I'm interested in today is to think about how we can create supports at the state level that empower more action at the individual and community level.
A great idea. Thank you, Jessica. Chief Britt.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chief Rebecca Britt. I'm with the Louisiana Band of Choctaw. I sit on the Agriculture, Forestry, Conservation, and Waste Committee, as well as the Louisiana Native American Commission. Of course, I'm excited to talk about the way that we use our traditional knowledge in agriculture and, well, the entire circle of things, really, and the way that we look ahead 7 generations. I'm honored to be here today.
Thank you, Chief. Great to have you. Dr. Foster?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kimberly Foster. I'm the Dean of the School of Science and Engineering at Tulane. My background is in mechanical engineering, and I sit on the Science Advisory Committee. And I'm interested to discuss and brainstorm about how universities can play a bigger role in engaging with community and government agencies to advance the participation of everyone and everything related to climate and climate change and knowledge dissemination.
That sounds great. Thanks, Kimberly. Monica?
Good morning, I'm Monica Farris. I'm the director of UNO CHART, which is an applied social science hazards research center at the University of New Orleans, and I also teach in the Planning and Urban Studies department. I sit on the Science Advisory Group, and I look forward to hearing more about how the group will define participation and discussions of equity across the different sectors and the different ideas that we'll be sharing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Connie?
Good morning, this is Connie Betts. I am from the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development, and I am here as a backup role to Dr. Eric Kawamoto, who sits on the Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Connie. Dr. Lomnicki?
Hello, my name is Slava Lomnicki. I'm Associate Professor of Environmental Sciences and Environmental Chemistry at LSU. I am Science Advisor for the Louisiana Environmental Action Network, and I'm here on their behalf. And I'm also a Program Chair for the American Chemical Society Environmental Chemistry Division. And my expertise is generally on the emissions and anthropogenic sources of pollution. And as Lean is generally not on any specific committee, is just trying to engage with all the communities, committees in regards of the community impacts.
Thank you, Doctor. Great to have you with us today. John Pete.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Pete. I'm a USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service employee here in Louisiana and serve on the Ag, Forestry, Conservation, and Waste Subcommittee as a non-voting in a technical advisory role.
Thank you, John. Great to have you. Kent.
Good morning. It's Kent Rogers. I'm the MPO director for the Shreveport-Bossier MPO. Sit on the Transportation Committee, and today I'm here to listen and see how we can bring some of this back to the local jurisdictions.
Thank you, Kent. Craig Colton.
Yeah, good morning. This is Craig Colton. I'm in the Department of Geography and Anthropology at LSU. I'm on the equity group, and I'm just looking forward to hearing what this group has to say about participation and how we can participate with the broader group. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And Camille Conaway, I saw that you just joined us. We're just doing a quick round of introductions, your name and affiliation, your group on the task force, on the climate initiative, and then something you're interested in to discuss today.
Sure, I'm Camille Conaway. I'm with the Louisiana Community and Technical College System. We coordinate all 12 community colleges across the state. I'm on the Finance Advisory Group, so I look forward to the discussions today.
Thank you, Camille. Did I miss anyone? Everyone's boxes kept moving. We're good to go. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Let me just check our attendee list and make sure we're not missing any members in there. Looks like we're good to go. So with that, I'm going to share my screen with you all again. And as you could tell, even from the introductory round of just talking with each other in introductions, there are a lot of different groups represented here and expertise that you all bring to the table. And so I'm really excited for this conversation to enhance how we're looking at increasing participation in this effort. But I wanted to bring us back to this slide as we go through just a really quick intro presentation. This slide is very familiar to our sector committees, but I just wanted to bring in our advisory groups to the process of what committees have been doing the past few months. So since our February all-hands meeting through the end of April, our committees are working to develop strategies and actions. We're in this action open solicitation of our members as well as members of the public as we're looking to build out these emission reduction actions for our climate strategy. So in the red box is where we are right now. We're in this mid-April meeting to enhance the development of those actions before the end of this initial deadline in April 30th. So as we described in the last all-hands meeting in February, we're doing two things at once right now. So the committees in green are working on this action development process. And today we're focusing in on the action cross-sector workshops. And then in blue at the bottom of this slide, the advisory groups right now are doing, or they will starting next week, be working on evaluation, their first round of evaluation at this high strategy level, organized as hypothetical emission reduction scenarios. And so today is the point where we can intersect these two tracks, just for a minute, to have that cross-sector, but also the advisory expertise that are crossing over into that action development process. So we want to enhance the actions that are being worked on, but also identify gaps where we see them in these conversations. So diving into these April workshops, we want to improve the draft action proposals, but also identify some new areas through our cross-disciplinary review and discussion of issues that cut across our sectors. So these 6 different sessions that I note on the right in this green box are areas that we heard raised across many of our different groups. They don't fit squarely in 1 or 2 or even 3 of our sector committees. And we knew that these conversations needed to be had so that we can enhance the development of action so that we're not having these big gaps across our sectors, because sometimes there are actions that might not fall explicitly in those sectors, or that we're missing areas inside of actions that are being developed that could really enhance them and make them stronger. So that's the intent of the workshops. And before diving into our discussion today, I just wanted to lay a few ground rules for us. I really want this discussion to be led by you all. I'll tee up questions and help work through some of these ideas, but I want to hear from you guys at the committee level what you're working on or what you would like to work on. And at the advisory level, how can we make this better? How can we bring in the financial and the equity and the legal, the scientific lens into the work that's being done? Again, just sharing the floor, we want to hear from everyone. As we heard in the introductions, you all have very different expertise, and it's really important that we use this as an opportunity to enhance the work that is ongoing. So just want to share the floor in that. And then the last note is just to stay action-oriented. Our goal today is to improve action proposals. We're not getting into the evaluation phase yet. That will happen later on. So today we want to focus on really helping to improve these action ideas and brainstorming topics that span across our sector committees as well. So with that, jumping into this session, the idea for this workshop on increasing participation in climate action really arose from conversations in sector committees throughout March on the necessity to engage more local industries, businesses, institutions, communities, and residents in the work of climate action. So many committees talked about this gap of participation, but we weren't really able to identify those key tactics or ways in which we could address this. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And so with that, I'd like us to reach a few outcomes by the end of this meeting that we have identified some methods and tactics of ways to increase participation and create equitable access across our sectors. But I also think there's a great opportunity here for us to think about some cross-sector actions that more comprehensively engage people in climate action that span across different sectors. So kind of thinking in two frames here of how we identify those methods and tactics and then apply it in thinking about these cross-sector actions. So as we were discussing actions in committee meetings in March, we've already started to identify a few actions that would help illuminate and bridge this gap of participation. But I realize that this is not a comprehensive list, nor comprehensive in understanding of where and how do we actually make that engagement happen. So we'll come right back to this slide. I'll actually park on this slide when we go into our working session so we can see what's already been discussed and build from that. But just to lay a few questions for us to think about, again, just questions to keep in mind as we go through those different topics. If we're looking at education and engagement, how can we effectively engage communities in climate action? What does participation look like at those different scales that I mentioned? What does assistance to local industry and individuals look like and is required to aid transition? What training and assistance is required in creating new opportunities? In terms of equitable access, how do we ensure equitable distribution of benefits? How can we ensure ability of all to participate in our climate programs? And how do marginalized people benefit from climate action? And then that last section on motivating action, what are ways that we can motivate and change behavior? And how can this be applied in these actions that are being developed? So I know that these are very big questions, and we won't be able to fully tackle them all today, but just the frame of mind I think we can get in as we start to address some of these actions, some big questions that we might want to bring into the consideration. And with that in mind, just to reframe, desired outcomes is identifying methods and tactics, and then hoping to find some of those cross-sector actions to comprehensively engage in climate action. So with that, I'm going to come back to this slide on the relevant strategies and actions, and in a minute open us up for discussion here. But I find that the value of today's discussion will be found in bringing together a very broad group of members who can help inform different aspects of these components that are necessary in increasing participation. So our finance members can help us think through what are some financial mechanisms. Our equity members can really help us consider how to help participation become more equitable. Our legal members can help us understand the laws and policies that we can use to make climate action more accessible to people and to businesses as well. So a few things that I think we can determine in this session, and we'll take these one by one of these four different blocks that I've laid out here. But one, we can think about what are the gaps that we see here that are necessary to make climate action successful and effective in this area. Two, what are some approaches to address that gap or those gaps? And then can we build this into existing actions that are being developed, or do we want to make one of those cross-sector type actions to address this issue? So with that, we can start on this concept of education and community engagement. A few ideas that have been laid out here are engaging communities in deployment of new infrastructure and technology, incorporating traditional ecological knowledge into decision-making and climate policy, and then education and marketing programs for rideshare. So with that, members, I'm going to open us up. If anyone has some ideas on gaps that exist in this concept of engagement, let me go back, there we go, in education and community engagement, or if anyone wants to talk more about the actions that are listed here, let's start there, and then we can begin to think about the tactical approaches.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So just before we get into more details, can you give us an idea of what, or has it been discussed in how we're defining participation? You mentioned it a minute ago on an earlier slide, how do we envision participation at an individual level or for an entity, or I can't remember all the choices you had given us, but I think that might make a difference in how we come up with strategies.
So that has not been discussed, and maybe that's a great point for us to start. Monica, do you have any ideas on that, or other members, on how we might frame participation?
Well, and one thing to think about is when we're thinking about participation, and it's easier to think about on an individual level, are we looking to just educate people so that they know, to buy an electric car or to turn off their lights, versus are we wanting people to be more involved in policies and identifying the types of training they need, those, to be more involved in the process and not necessarily just the actions that we all decide are good, if that makes sense.
That's what I'm going for in these 4 different buckets. There are a lot of different components in increasing participation. So there's the community engagement and education component. There's also the technical support or supporting that transition, and then the implementation and access side as well. So I was thinking we could take each of those components, but if you see any missing ideas in how we are or might consider addressing participation, we can absolutely include that.
Yeah, this is Arthur. I would say that when we look at education and community engagement on climate action, we shouldn't make any assumptions about the community and their awareness or lack thereof. I know in many underserved communities and low-income communities, the thought of climate action is looked at as something that's not a necessity for quality of life issues, because they're, of course, dealing with jobs and health and education, things of that nature. So I think when we look at education, we do need to incorporate that as understanding how it relates climate action and strategies and even outcomes, how to relate to all communities, which may also get into the equitable access as well. But making sure that all people are fully aware of the importance that this is not just for the affluent, but this is for everybody if we're going to make a difference. And then I think as we look at, how do we bring that into the communities through community engagement, we will need to look at maybe different components of how do you get to different communities? Sometimes the larger meetings that are held sometimes by the state on different issues, particularly coastal issues, are too intimidating for people in the community, or where the rubber meets the road. And those are the people that you really want to impact, because they're the ones who are truly going to make us move that rock to be more effective and more efficient. But they do have to understand and get it that it includes them, not excludes them, and how they can do that even with some of the limitations they have, and how it will increase their quality of life issues on that point.
I think Arthur makes a great point. And I think that one of the pieces that I notice when I go to other places with climate issues, for example, the Netherlands, they do a really great job at education of people starting at the really young levels, and they have museums next to spillways, and they have little rooftop farms to grab stormwater, and I think if we think creatively about ways that we can start engaging the community, and like Arthur said, making them aware that by doing these things and taking these actions, we create a more healthy, we create a healthier place in which to live, and we do impact the things like public health of the communities indirectly.
Those are great ideas, Kimberly, and I'd love to dig into that idea more. Jessica, I see your hand, and Logan, yours as well. And then Harry.
Thanks. I was just going to say that I think as sort of a foundation for all these ideas, which are good, I think increasing our understanding of what barriers are for different groups of people would be really important to developing strategies to engage them. So, do they not think it's important? Is it a financial barrier? Do they not have information? So I think there's a lot of different reasons why people may not be motivated to participate. And I think understanding those reasons is an important first step toward developing strategies.
Um,
Thank you, Jessica. Yes, Logan.
I think it's important to remember that Louisiana has some really great experience in talking with communities that are dealing with and working with communities that have been dealing with the climate crisis already. And that listening to communities, what they're experiencing, and connecting that with the climate crisis, because everyone in Louisiana is dealing with it already. And whether there's a recognition, whether it's automatically tied that the extreme heat and therefore the electricity bills that people are dealing with, or the flooding that we're experiencing in throughout our state in various ways, connects directly to this. And so I think I might have said this in another meeting in the past, but I think we can learn from the LA Safe program, which really worked to connect communities to the coastal restoration work, which is, as we know, a piece of, not the full part, but a piece of the climate adaptation conversation. And so really putting money into a state program to do that education, to listen to communities and say, what are you experiencing? What are your concerns in daily life? And then connecting that with, here is what is driving that, and then here are the ways that you could get engaged, or what do you think are some solutions in your community? And so I think learning from the past and really listening and leaning in and saying, this isn't just a business solution. It really needs to be also about trusting that the Louisiana, that our public institutions are part of this and are listening. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Logan. That ties well with what Jessica mentioned too, around how do we understand those barriers? How do we understand what is inhibiting action? So thank you for raising that. Harry, I'll go to you next, and then Bill.
Yeah, I think all these comments already made are spot on, and yeah, learning from the LA Safe program and maybe adapting that could be a great action. And I just wanted to kind of frame it in meeting people, and maybe this is just restating what everybody's been saying, but meeting people where they are, not only in what they're seeing on the ground, but also in terms of their priorities in life, and what the most pressing priorities are for them. Because as everybody's mentioned, you can in one way, shape or another, climate is related, and or emissions are incorporated into almost every aspect of our daily lives. And so kind of meeting people where they are, I think is critical. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Harry. That's great. Bill.
Thank you, Lindsay. I've had an idea eaten at me for a while. I brought it up at a previous forum on the task force, but I still haven't fleshed it out very well, and I need to get a little help from the task force and all the committee members and general public, for that matter. It's to provide a climate letter grade to the electric utilities, and possibly some of the very large carbon emitters in the state. I was raised in Baton Rouge, and certainly am very familiar with the industrial sector of our economy. I'm interested in bringing the general public into this process by letting them know how clean the electricity is that they use at their home, and how clean their businesses are that they work at. So the only such rating that I've seen so far came from the Sierra Club, and I am a member and supporter, but I'm smart enough to know that we have to have something that might be a little more broad-based as a climate rank or rating system. But it seems to me, if the general public were to know where their power comes from and how clean it is, it may make a difference in their daily lives, and it might provide a little oomph to the task force as we go forward and bring some recommendations to the governor and the legislature. And similarly, if you work at one of the big plants down south and you may have very little idea about what it does and what impact it has on the environment, it might be good for you to know that that plant has a C or a D climate rate. So I'm open to suggestions on where we get this system, whether it comes from whoever or whatever. I'm just interested in having that letter grade.
Thank you, Bill, for raising that idea. That gets back to a point Logan made on increasing transparency to being able to build trust in the fact that change is happening in climate action. And I think that's a great way to provide that transparency. Logan also raises the comment in the chat that we could also do that with housing stocks to receive a rating for efficiency and resilience. So it's a great idea that could be applied across a few different sectors. So we should definitely come back to that. Dr. Lumnicki, do you have a comment on that?
Yes, I have a general comment. We need to remember that especially for the underserved communities who are in general struggling, all the climate actions that might be proposed, these communities need to see an immediate benefit for them, because for them it's very hard to think about something that's gonna happen in 50 years, right, or 100 years, if they don't know what financially is going to happen to them tomorrow, on 2 days from now, or in a month. So in this respect, their access to a lot of climate initiatives is very limited. And this needs to be, first of all, enhanced for them. If you take, for example, solar panel programs, they're the group that have no access to it whatsoever because they cannot afford it. So there has to be some mechanisms created for such communities that these also apply to them. And the second thing is, when we're talking about the new infrastructure that's gonna improve the energy efficiency, very important thing is to take into the account that such a new infrastructure is not in the expense of the quality of life of those underserved communities, right? That it's not a case that something is being built which will negatively impact the local communities by a location or by emission or by some other factors.
Thank you, Dr. Lumnicki, for building on that idea. Did I see another hand that was raised? Did someone lower a hand? So these are great ideas. Arthur mentions in the chat it may be significant to incorporate social media tools and activities to bring impact to our marketing programs and importance of climate action to reach a greater dive for all communities. Thanks, Arthur, for raising that point. And I think we've identified some good needs of educating people how to reach different communities, a point Arthur raised initially, identifying barriers and motivating reasons for change, seeing actualized benefits, as Dr. Lumnicki just mentioned, and listening to communities. So let's think about some tactical approaches that might help us fill these needs. So I know, yes, Harry, you want to kick us off?
Well, I just wanted to, build off of an idea that was already raised about the LA Safe program, and probably by Logan, and possibly using that as a model, for community engagement, and I think a significant reason why that was so successful is because it was not just the state leading the way, that it was a partnership with Foundation for Louisiana, and so this sort of public-private partnership model that allows greater participation from non-governmental sector, but also additional resources, because in my experience in government, the limitation on resources is the main restrictor in terms of how much engagement you can actually muster. And I think that's by bringing in outside partners, you're able, I think the interest is there from, state government, local government, federal government, to bolster and increase community outreach. And I think it's through those kind of partnerships that, but I'm interested in what other people think on in terms of how to expand the outreach pie, so to speak. And are there other models, beyond kind of LA Safe program, or ways that, we could specifically think in terms of carrying that over and repurposing that model?
I'd like to, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good, Monica.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I do emphasize again, like others have said, the LA Safe process. And also within that process, there were a lot of different partners, but that process also empowered citizens. Through the Foundation for Louisiana had the Lead the Coast participants. So we had citizens actually leading discussions through a lot of those meetings. And so citizens were empowered to help, residents helping other residents to have these discussions, which was great. And also you were mentioning looking for tactics or examples, maybe having the state support citizen advisory groups or panels for when the state is ready to deploy new infrastructure, if they're doing pilot projects or something, to allow those citizen groups to help decide on where those would be located or how it would go about or who would be involved, helping to evaluate the project. So having the citizens actively involved, I think, would help to build trust and also just to get information from the ground, right?
Those are great ideas, Monica. Logan, I'll go to you next.
My comment is very similar to Monica's, which is that there are already a lot of organizations working on the ground in fence line communities, coastline communities, tribal communities who are trusted members of those communities who should be resourced to support this work and who basically have just been struggling to stay above water, so to speak. And I think that working closely with some of those organizations that are already on the ground that have those relationships is absolutely the way to go. I'm just yes-anding, Monica.
Thanks, Logan. So if we're building out this idea a little bit more, I'd like to go back to a point that Arthur made earlier and Kimberly as well. Kimberly, the point that you made on utilizing some education techniques that you've seen done in other places, how can we incorporate that here? And Arthur, to your point about engaging different communities and their unique needs, where do you guys see that we can apply that here? Where can we bring in those methods?
Well, I think we look at communities that sometimes have either felt they weren't included or engaged or wasn't engaged. What I've seen over time is we've brought out, and this is whether it's local or state or even federal, we've made an opportunity available, but truly that opportunity wasn't receptive to getting communities involved. And for example, and I don't know if this is a good example, but let's just talk about the vaccines and making the vaccines available, but where are they available? And so when we start bringing them into the communities closer to where people are to bring them maybe a better comfort zone, then we start to get a little bit more engagement in the community of participating in vaccines. If we open up opportunities to talk about it within their own domains, then we can address some of the concerns that may be there. And some of those concerns may be ones that we may not see as being concerns because we kind of agree with climate action, but it helps to offset some of that. So I think going where there's maybe sometimes the greatest comfort zone, again, Monica, and I put in the chat, I think it made great point in relation of to get engagement, then you bring in, you engage with that community to get them to talk about, to get buy-in. because that's where the credibility is. You know, our task force may not necessarily be the credible element to go into all communities. So we want to reach within that communities to get those who it's almost, it's not sometimes a message, just a messenger. And I think we need to take that significantly into place, because I've seen that through, again, both local, state, and federal initiatives that are great, but don't reach intended audiences or all audiences, or get the kind of traction that we think we should get.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And I think that the points that Monica and Logan made about all these engagement groups that are trusted in various communities, I really think we could use that and as good inroads, and then maybe use some of the, I mean, for example, from the university perspective, there's a number of people on here at local universities, and I'm sure we all have our outreach organizations. Tulane has a community service requirement among its students. Could we partner with these connections to the communities that are affected, and that communities that may be different from our own communities, to try and learn from them and develop strategies, for example, through our community service projects, or from other outreach agencies that could, you know, build the right thing, right? I think the point has been really made that we don't always know the right things that are facing people and how to connect to them, but could we work with these stakeholders to try and figure out the right strategies for different groups of people and different communities and different areas that are dealing with different things, to build that trust and educate them in a way that makes sense for those communities.
Thank you, Kim. Those are great ideas. Chief Britt, I see your hand.
Hi. Yes, I'm hoping that my sound and my internet hold out for me to make my point. I just want to say that we can't really speak to the future of the climate without speaking to our future, which is our children. We try to plant the seed in our children early to know that you're living with the earth, not just on her. And when a child realizes that and they grow up and become an adult that automatically thinks of those things. And I feel like that's the most important thing that we can do as far as actions towards the future of our climate.
Such an important orientation for us to keep in mind. Thank you, everyone, for raising these great points. I'm going to move us along to this next topic of support in transition. But just to recap from this section, and Allison, I'll trust you at the end to do a more comprehensive recap, but I see this idea of working with communities and like a P3 LA Safe type model, and then that climate grading system are two big ideas that came out of that discussion just now. Now moving along to this discussion on technical support to transition. This was a big idea that was raised in our ag and forestry group. So Ron and John, I might call on you guys here to speak to some of those needs that exist, and then also in transportation. I know that Jessica and Kent, I believe, raised a few ideas around how to work and support this transition. So I'm curious where additional needs might exist here, and then what tactical, kind of the same that we did in the beginning, what are those tactical approaches that can help us increase support in transition? Yes, Logan?
I'm sorry, I hate taking up so much space. I just want to quickly say that there are already programs like the incumbent worker training programs that are virtually unknown in Louisiana by a lot of industries. And so I think engaging more with the industries that we want to encourage with some of the kinds of programming we want to train for, using those existing programs, lifting those up, I think is a really simple next step.
So Logan, are you saying that there are programs out there, but not in Louisiana, or there are programs in Louisiana we need to leverage?
Yeah, the incumbent worker training program is an existing program in Louisiana. And it's, to my knowledge, used mostly by the manufacturing and oil and gas industries for training for some of their existing workforce on new technologies. And it's maybe someone else who has experience with the program can speak to it. So I will go ahead and shut up.
Thanks, Logan. Camila, this is your exact area where we need you.
Sure. So incumbent worker training program that Ms. Burke is referring to, it's funded through assessments on employers and the unemployment insurance fund. Essentially, it goes into the fund, and the balance of the fund, of the UI Trust Fund, that's currently, as we all know, bankrupt because of the vast number of unemployed people. Depending on the balance in the fund, there's an annual allotment for incumbent worker training, and it's available to every company that pays in, small, medium, and large. There is no, it's not driven by any particular industry. So it's not more heavily oil and gas or more heavily retail or more heavily, it's pretty evenly dispersed. And there's a component of it that is for small businesses only as well. So it is there, but it is for existing employers to train for their particular needs. And so, you know, if you have an existing employer paying in and they want to reskill to do something different, that would be up to them. Versus, you know, if we're trying to stand up new types of training programs for jobs that we see coming where we don't have an existing workforce prepared today. And, you know, that's something we talked about in our finance group as well, is the sequencing of some of that, because what we try not to do in the community colleges is encourage enrollment and people to either borrow money or, you know, use their the little time that they have invested in training for something that may or may not be available on the back end, right? We want to be sure the jobs are available that we're training them for, whether we're using public funds, whether we're asking people to you know, to fund their own, you know, tuition, as we do often at a community college. So we, you know, the balance of that, the chicken and egg of training people, but also ensuring that jobs are available on the back end specific to that training is going to be an important challenge.
Thank you, Camille.
I would also say that the technical support to transition could be a great conduit as it involves both urban and non-urban communities. You know, many of the times, one of those two groups and those two big buckets don't think that the issues are relevant for them. But when you talking about jobs availability, even through training, it's a good transition, and the jobs and climate action can very well, you know, going to be for both those in urban communities as well as those in non-urban communities. And that there's not as much of a void or difference in many domains as it sometimes is anticipated between the two groups. And maybe a way to bridge that transition, maybe through jobs and employment programs, opportunities, understanding, first of all, that there are programs out there that are not being engaged, but are there and are appropriated, then, you know, it's another way of bringing that to the attention of those who are most apt to or willing to take advantage of that, whether through community colleges. Again, goes back to some of that marketing piece of letting them know what's out there and putting some incentives to get those who want to go but can't afford to go, but, you know, would like to be part of that in some way to bridge that transition, and laces that around this whole idea of climate action and what it really is all about, and how it impacts every community, basically individuals who can willing to make that transition and know what the opportunities are.
Arthur, you mentioned that there are some state opportunities, I believe, on the job and employment side. Can you elaborate on those?
Well, I don't know specifically. I mean, I see a lot of workforce training and workforce programs, and both from the public sector, but also from the non-public sector that, talks about trainings, grants that are out there, both federal and state in many instances. I don't have any specific ones that come to mind per se, but I know that there's been a lot of conversation about climate action, climate change jobs, particularly in the new administration. And when we talk about programs, of course, jobs, job training comes into play, or workforce components always come into play. I mean, we see that even in our localities where there's workforce training on environmental types of positions, for just as an example on that point. We know that as we continue to move forward with climate action, there will be workforce opportunities that are some going to require, some minimal training maybe to transition certain skill sets, and other may be more extensive, but they're out there. And, if we know if we just do a kind of a listserv of what's out there, then see how you can plug in some of those opportunities and then market those out into the communities, because people are just not aware of it. They don't know. And even at the community college level of training, they don't really know what's out there. And if they don't dig to find out, then, it just is kind of just out there, and they'll say there's no opportunity for me. So we got to find a way of how to enhance that kind of marketing effort. Again, going back through social media is another way of doing that, to make sure that people know at least what's available so they can take advantage of it, and so they can feel that they're part of it and not isolated.
Just building on that point, a lot of our workforce training, whether it's in community colleges or four-year universities or through our federally funded America's Job Centers and local workforce boards, a lot of the training is geared toward what is known in our state as 3, 4, and 5-star jobs. These are higher wage, high demand jobs that are produced in a forecast every year by the state, by a variety of state agencies through an occupational forecasting conference. So it's a data-driven formula that shows both what jobs are in demand, as well as what the wages are like by region, as well as statewide. We use that to design and fund what types of training we do, right? So when climate types of jobs show up, that is when you'll start to see your training programs pivot, because that is when they will have funding to be able to offer training in those particular programs. So a lot of our need-based aid and other types of aid and federal funding does revolve around, showing through data that those jobs are there. Then the training, then there is financial aid for the training. And so I think we can't miss that step of identifying what jobs are available and where are they and how many and what are the wages going to be, so that then we design the training to fit the jobs, if that makes sense. We have a whole workforce development system that's geared toward training for available high wage, high demand jobs. That's sort of the goal. So identifying what those are in this space would be a first step towards establishing the training and the career pathways for those jobs.
Thank you, Camille, for building on that idea. So if I'm hearing this correctly, the first component is identifying what jobs are available, and then we can design training and those marketing tools based around the job availability. And this ties into a conversation we had yesterday morning on one of the workshops was on advancing research and new technology, understanding how we can grow that job market, what opportunities can we present to increase the jobs, especially in clean and renewable energy relevant to this work. And so helping us on that side to build the pool of jobs that are available, and then coming in here with this idea of designing training around that. John, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, you touched on a topic that I was just thinking about with that first bullet about increasing technical and financial support and education for farmers and foresters, because I work in that sector. USDA has several programs that provide short-term incentives to adopt conservation practices that provide society with ecological benefits like curtailing and sequestering greenhouse gases. But unless you know the society as a whole understands what agriculture is doing, you know, it boils down to that bottom line for that individual business of providing food, fiber, and fuel for the world. If they can't make a living, they can't implement you know, good conservation practices. So number one is their bottom line, I guess. So the other side of the coin about educating society about if they provide these ecological benefits by doing something different, how can they supplement their bottom line? You know, because the government can't prop that up forever. You know, the incentives are there for short term for education, and hopefully those conservation practices stick. But if it can be motivated by market and market driven, people, you know, are willing to pay, just like they're willing to pay for rice to eat, they're willing to pay for sequestering greenhouse gases on private agricultural lands. That gives a permanent financial incentive for that producer to do it. You know, so it's both sides, and I'm hearing this from several sectors, but certainly, you know, you have to have both sides. Is no question.
Absolutely, John. It is on both sides of having those incentives, but also propping up those market mechanisms to keep it going. And you mentioned a USDA grant, and I see in the chat, Logan, you've made a few comments, and Arthur as well, on potential federal opportunities. I was wondering if you could speak to that just for a minute. Encourage us with some potential for federal funds.
Go ahead, Arthur.
I was responding to a chat. Give me the question again.
I saw in the chat there were a few federal opportunities that were identified, and I was wondering if you guys could just articulate that and hone in on it a little more.
Okay.
Logan, I think you had one around DOE.
That was, I think, Ann had that.
Yeah, Ann and I were both talking about, there are some really good Department of Energy grants and technical supports that are available to states. But those funds require the states to have a state energy plan. And so Louisiana basically, because we've never had a state energy plan, we've just not applied for those significant dollars for training, for pilot programs, for all kinds of things. And so as I know, there's a state energy plan underway, or at least in development through the Department of Natural Resources. We definitely need to be preparing and looking to those Department of Energy funds. And as we know, the current administration is really interested in moving more dollars into the Department of Energy for these kinds of programs. And so I think we should not just assume that all of the money has to come from Louisiana taxpayers and ratepayers, but that there are dollars out there that are available for this process. And Ann pointed out that there is a current grant available that does not require that state energy plan to be in place for DOE Vehicle Technology Office. And so Louisiana should really get on top of that to access some of those dollars for workforce training, specifically for EVs and alternative fuels.
Thanks, Logan and Ann, for those ideas. And something we talked about in another workshop was the idea that we not look better for grants, but our applications can become stronger when there are partnerships built, when a lot of people are coming together to submit these applications. So being able to think through this, and as we talked about on the job side, awareness of what jobs are out there, also aware of what opportunities for grants might be available at the state level, and also more locally on at this local level in job training programs and engaging businesses. So I think this is a great idea on technical support and transition. And just to bring us full circle, when we're looking at this component of technical support kind of across all of the different committees, the committee lenses. We talked about knowing what jobs are out there and creating training based off of that, and then identifying some of these federal opportunities and needs. Another point I thought was really helpful that Arthur raised is around understanding the urban versus the rural community needs. Louisiana has more urban areas, but also very predominantly rural areas as well. So we need to keep an eye out for those different needs that arise in transition. I think that carries us well into this next topic of discussing equitable access and implementation, also distribution of resources and climate action. I'd like to tie in that idea here too of the urban versus rural lens that we need to consider alongside this equity lens. So with that, we've laid out a few different actions already under this equitable access component. This is something a lot of groups have discussed, but I think we can spend a little time here to hone in on possibly some tactics and methods to address equitable access more broadly across these sectors. So with that, I'll kick it to you guys and see what ideas we have here.
Well, Lindsay, in looking at the equitable access, one of the things that, in looking at the list, caught my attention was the community solar and ownership models. I'm vaguely familiar, of course, obviously, with solar and our community, for example, after Hurricane Katrina became one of the top minority communities of home ownership that had solar power on that. But I also, as we've been doing more, looking at how solar can play a key role in underserved communities and other communities related there. I think there's opportunity to dwell further into that, where that truly impacts not only residents, but also businesses, particularly small businesses in the community, in relation of looking at community solar, and also as being a form of energy to enhance all of our products in community and in marketing and using that as a tool. So, I definitely think that it would bring interest, and also for younger people in the community. Of course, when you start talking about some of these like solar, it does many times catch their attention as compared to some of us who've been around a while and not all that familiar with it. So I think it could be at least a lead into opening up discussions and maybe even opportunities within all of our communities in time, both again, urban and non-urban communities together, because we all need energy in one way, shape, or form to do the products and businesses that we need to carry out.
Those are great ideas, Arthur. I know a few other states have also similarly implemented community solar models. I think between 5 and 10 states have done that. So that would be interesting to look into. I know, Logan, I see in the chat that you mentioned that that's sort of available to us, but there are significant barriers. Maybe we can explore some of those. Bill from the Power Committee is also on here and might have some ideas. Before we transition, Jessica, I see your hand now. I apologize for missing it sooner.
No problem. I just wanted to mention from a planning perspective, in many places in Louisiana, if not most, affordable housing is geographically very disconnected from job centers. And, I see on here we have improved transit, but I think in addition to improved transit, we also have an opportunity to change that geographic disparity as we, think about creating new industries and new jobs. But we can only do that if there is much greater coordination between our housing entities and our transportation planning and our economic development efforts, so that we can ensure that new affordable housing is being developed within easy access of these job centers, and that's not going to happen on its own. And so I think this is an opportunity to really change the trajectory of our affordable housing development practices.
Thanks, Jessica. And it sounds like even more broadly than just affordable housing, as you mentioned, in regard to just how we plan to.
That's right. That's right. And right. And that gets to the larger point of, you know, just combating and reversing sprawl will help a great deal towards meeting our emissions goals. So it's an important thing to keep in mind in all of these efforts.
And Jessica, where do you see that those partnerships need to be formed? I'm trying to think who can help ensure that coordinated development. How do we get there?
I think they need to start at the state level. And you know, even the federal government attempted a you know, coordination between HUD, DOT, and EPA. And I think there's some talk of bringing that back, but we need to have similar coordination at the state level that then supports, you know, that same type of collaboration and coordination at the regional and local level. And those collaborations need to be, or that coordination needs to happen around a shared set of goals. And I think we could develop a great set of goals for that coordination based on the work of this task force.
Thanks, Jessica. Those are really important components of the equitable access conversation. Harry, I see your hand.
It's more a question perhaps for Logan, but I imagine there's been policy development on the improving access for home renters, and you know, to facilitate with the homeowner installing you know, rooftop solar. And so I don't know if are policy ideas that are already developed in general around the nation, or other examples that we can draw from, just to, you know, because there's the disconnect where the property owner doesn't really have the initiative because they aren't going to see the lower bill, you know, utility bill, but you know, the renter certainly would benefit.
There are a few ways to get to it. Probably the most cost-effective way is actually to encourage community solar, because many of our urban centers are majority renters, and community solar is the most cost-effective sort of kilowatt hour by kilowatt hour way to do it. And it's a way to bring down the cost and give lots of people access. The difficulty right now, as I said in the chat, is that the way the rule is written, it is the credit on a bill is so low, it's unworkable. And in most states that have really successful community solar, that credit is a 1-for-1. It's what's called virtual net metering. And it enables just about anybody to have access and to reduce their bill and be part of community ownership of these resources. There are other models that are happening now in some other states, and this is what I think is really ripe for Louisiana, which is supporting multifamily property owners to invest in things like solar and battery backup for resilience, and getting the kinds of support, not just saying, you know, hey, you should do it because you're right, there is a split incentive, but a way to incentivize it using various incentive tools, whether they're through the utility system or through sort of the state taxing system. But there are plenty of models in other states that I'm happy to share how this is working.
Is that helpful, Harry?
Yeah, thank you very much, Logan. I appreciate that explanation.
Thanks, Logan, for that context. I'm curious from some of our equity advisory members, Dr. Robinson Morris, I see you've been able to join us this morning, and Craig Colton as well. And even from the health lens, Dr. Kevin Conrad, how do you guys see this, especially this component of increasing access to capital and ability to participate in climate programs? looking beyond just some of these sector conversations, how do you all envision equitable access and implementation can look? I'm curious your thoughts.
If I could jump in here, I think these are some great key points, but I see things too that are missing that would really enable people at a lower income level to jump in and participate and begin to see some direct benefits. What's the big energy consumer in the typical household? The refrigerator. How do we get more energy efficient refrigerators into houses that really need them? How do we get more efficient air conditioning and heating systems into rental properties that are poorly insulated and just waste a tremendous amount of power? These are the kind of things that people could begin to see the change in their monthly bills if they had these more efficient utility items in their households. I think that could be a really, into that. And just some of the things we've been working on for years is better insulation and airtight or tighter windows and those kinds of things. And then how do you help them afford those kind of things? How do you make those pieces of equipment more affordable? And how do you help them transition from, like I told the equity group the other day, when we had the big transition from big gas guzzlers in the 70s when prices of oil shot up and everybody started buying more fuel efficient Japanese cars. The people who could least afford it ended up with the big gas guzzlers getting at 5, 6, 7, 8 miles a gallon. So how do we help people transition to automobiles that are more efficient? And those are the kind of things that really are essential. It should really predate strategic siting of charging stations. Oh, that's good. That's wonderful. But how do you get people who have the least capacity to pay for this transition into situations that bring the cost of the transition down?
Thank you, Craig. When you were saying your comments, I saw a lot of smiling faces and nods. So that's a great point that you raised. And I might throw a question back to you that Jessica had raised earlier on what are the barriers to that? Is it the expenses? And this might also be a question for Logan, but what are the expenses? Is that the problem? Is it knowledge of what is more efficient or accessibility to get those resources? I'm curious what you think on that.
Well, looking back on the transition to, more efficient automobiles, it was simply the cost of the cars. You couldn't afford a new car, you bought a used one, and the used ones were all these giant gas guzzlers that were suddenly very affordable. If someone has a refrigerator provided by their landlord that's very inefficient, they're not going to go out and buy a new one. So it's making these same thing with air conditioners and heating systems. The landlords are going to keep patching those systems together if they're not paying the bills and pass the costs on to the renters. So I think it's price and making it, providing some incentives for landlords to provide more efficient devices in their homes, in their rental properties.
Logan, did you have any comments on that? I know this is your lane of expertise.
I'm trying really hard not to speak too much and I'm failing miserably today. I apologize. But Craig, I'm sitting over here going, yes, 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 absolutely. And Louisiana is one of those states that has fallen miserably behind on having really robust energy efficiency programs that are managed sort of at the utility scale level. We've been encouraging the Louisiana Public Service Commission to enact some robust programs to do exactly this. For example, refrigerator switch outs and HVAC upgrades. But then there are also programs, there's a big one called the Weatherization Assistance Program that in Louisiana is run through the Louisiana Housing Corporation that targets deep weatherization using federal funds into low-income homes specifically in order to reduce their bills rather than just pay a sort of an assistance couple times a year. And these kinds of programs, we can expect that these programs are going to grow over the next handful of years. But the thing that we really need to see is coordination between those programs at the LHC and the various CAP agencies through the state that manage them and the utility scale type programs, so that we're leveraging those dollars together so that it's not a patchwork. And so far there hasn't been any real coordination there. But this is really desperately needed.
Thanks for raising that, Logan and Craig. Bill, do you have any, I noticed you were making a few comments in the chat. Do you have any comments on that as one of our other power people?
Yes, I think that's an idea worth considering. The Public Service Commission created energy efficiency programs probably 8 or 9 years ago, but they're very small, and they typically are subscribed or the money used up early in the year. And the weatherization programs, on the other hand, have a long history in the state and elsewhere in the country. And I think it's absolutely worthwhile to consider some type of collaboration between the two to make them more, excuse the pun, efficient.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bill. Those are great ideas that the three of you raised. Dr. Lomnicki, I see your hand.
Yes, I have a few comments regarding the discussions. Let me first talk about this, because I think it's a great idea about the exchange of the old utilities, that are in the houses. Now, there are some risks associated with it, and everybody should be aware that it might be sometimes perceived as actually passing money to actually landlords instead of, to the people, because this can be perceived like that. So this, it is a very interesting option. However, it should be associated with some other programs, like, for example, if you use these new utilities, there is some limit on how much you can increase the rent for some period of time and things like that, so it won't be like a passing money only to the landlord. So it has to have some limitations on that. Now, but I generally think there's one of the most important issues is, for example, when we were talking about the guzzlers cars, which end up usually at the more poorer communities, right? Because these are the cheaper cars, older ones, and I think this requires a more of a systemic approach, and I think this ties also very well with generally the policy of the mobile sources of emission. And I think in this case, the best solution is actually creating a good public transportation system, let's say electric rail system that can even, connect, from, I don't know, over the larger areas that can transport the people. And this will, to the shopping centers, to work in between, let's say, airports, Baton Rouge, New Orleans. So I think this is one of the best solutions, because as we know, actually the mobile sources is one of the bigger problems in the carbon dioxide emissions. And this is, what can be actually done. Of course, it will require significant investment, but I think it can be achieved, with the help of a federal government.
Thank you, Dr. Lomnicki. I did see Kevin come off mute a few times, and Dr. David Robinson Morris are our two Ochsner people, and I'd love to hear some ideas on the health perspective.
Yeah, hey, Kevin Conrad here. Let me start my video. Ochsner has announced a program to improve our healthcare ratings from 50th to 40th over the next 10 years, which is a very ambitious thing. But a key component to this is going to be improving our air quality, which obviously we can do by reducing fossil fuels and using alternative fuels. So as a part of our community education package, we certainly need to promote all of these initiatives and sort of connect the dots that will directly lead to improved human health of our communities and hopefully improved healthcare standings of our state. Now, how we do that, I'm not so sure, but that's something I think we in this committee need to think about in terms of developing, incorporating into educational curriculums that this directly improves our health.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kevin, for that. I saw a comment earlier in the chat raised similarly on that point. So on equitable access, again, I see kind of two ideas we've circled around. In the beginning, Jessica raised the idea of more coordinated development and planning. And then the second component we've spent a lot of time on is on the weatherization assistance, energy efficiency programs that not only reduces emissions, but we can also make them in equitable, we can build them in equitable ways. So those are two really great ideas to come from this discussion. And I'll bring us into this last component on motivating action. We've circled around this idea for a little while, and would just like to spend a few minutes thinking through how do we really motivate action at the individual and community level, possibly also at the business and university scale. Dr. Foster and Dr. Ferris, you probably have some ideas around how we can do that as well, and expanding on any of the ideas presented here too. So any thoughts on motivating action?
I can comment briefly. I do think that universities can play a role both in training, but also in just working with stakeholders and with some of these programs to try and help get dissemination of knowledge and true partnership. I think the universities have to do a better job of really listening to the stakeholders and being an active partner. And so I think at Tulane, through the community service efforts that's required of all our undergrads, as well as the increased research activities around river, coastal, and climate, I think that these both lead both from a research perspective as well as connection to the community, options for trying to partner more effectively and propose ideas and collaboration with both industry and government so that we can actually get some real change and use our resources to really help the communities that we're located in and beyond.
That's a great idea, Kimberly, on the aspect of growing knowledge. So on the educational, it'll bring us back to education and building partnerships as well. And I envision that's something that could be applied really well across universities in Louisiana.
And just to build on what was just said, partnering with universities, community colleges in your area to develop programs to do outreach so that people understand what they can do and what might be easy for them to do, right? What's the start with that low-hanging fruit to make it to work, because a lot of times people hear these things, but they don't believe that they could make a difference on their own, right? So to give some examples, some actionable items that people can do at a low cost. And then of course, incentives, I see a tax incentive program. Perhaps there could be pots of money available through state programs where a cost share could be offered for moderate income families, maybe who might want to implement something, but maybe, they could come up with a certain percentage of the cost. And I know they've done this with flood mitigation in certain communities across the country. So I'm just throwing that out there as maybe a potential project.
Thank you, Dr. Ferris.
I would also, going back to what Kimberly and Monica have said in relation to universities, maybe there's a way of collaborating or bring a collaboration between private institutions, community colleges, and historically Black colleges and universities within the state to work together and look at research, and then taking some of those actions and implementing them maybe in underserved communities where many of these institutions are located, to bring about some action and bring about some further elements of trust and equitable access as we talk about. So we have to look at maybe some different ways of how we do business than what we normally have done. It's there for us. It's just a matter of someone saying, okay, let's do this. I think the Black colleges and universities, your Southerns, your Gramblings, and even Xavier's, there is research and things being done. It doesn't always get the attention that maybe a Tulane or UNO might get, or LSU on that point. So, I think those are, to me, maybe some ways to just kind of, doesn't cost much, but pushing that button, I think the participants would probably welcome some nudge, particularly from the state side.
That's a really great idea, author. Something we discussed in the research group yesterday was just the need to identify what universities are doing what in the climate space, in the climate research space. And I think this is just an additional lens that's really helpful to understand what different universities are doing and where there's opportunity for collaboration in that. Ernest, I see your hand is raised on this.
Yes, LSU Ag Center has offices in just about every parish in the state. They've been working with not just only farmers, they've been working with the general public. We're all in this effort to address climate change. Some of us have little impact, others have a lot of impact, and some have an impact, and they also can do certain things, such as farmers that implementing conservation practices that are actually storing energy, carbon, and have been doing this for years and years and years. I just think we need an effort to communicate with the rural areas, and you could do that through the Ag Center. You could do it through all the commodity groups who have state organizations. They have state meetings. The message needs to be delivered that we're all in this effort together. We're not pointing the fingers at anyone. We're trying to all work together to address climate change. Whatever we do in the short term is not going to have a larger impact because the damage is so large. That's going to take years and years before we see any results from any of the climatic changes that we try and make today. But the farming industry and agriculture has a great opportunity to contribute to reducing our impact on our environment. Right now, as we speak, there are private entities that are working with farmers to develop strategies to sell carbon credits and other activities to help to mitigate climatic change. It's going to take a little bit different outreach, in my estimation, to be able to deliver a message of climatic change to farmers, because so many of them are impacted by a small change in their operation. The risk is so great that a small change, such as a hurricane or a drought or a man-made issue, that they're not going to survive. But what I'm trying to say is that we need to deliver a message that is true and and support for all of our efforts and make sure that we are delivering the same message across all communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Ernest. I'm really glad that you brought in that perspective of the needs for farmers and the needs around. I know it was also noted under the technical support. We spent a lot of time in the ag and forestry group thinking through how to increase participation, how to create those incentives for changing action. And this gets back to a point that John raised earlier as well on having incentives and market-based tools to help farmers in making that transition to more equitable, not more equitable, to more emission reduction and efficient best management practices. Ron, I'm curious if you have any further thoughts on this, and John as well, on how we can really dig into a little bit more on that motivating action piece for farmers.
Yeah, Lindsay, and I normally don't like to make reference to this, but it works. It has worked in agriculture, and that is a very strong motivator, is the threat of regulation. And when that happens, you see a whole lot of people that you normally wouldn't see come to the table, and you work out something that is going to address the problem, but at the same time, not put an additional burden on you. An example I will use is the Master Farmer Program. That program came about to address runoff from agricultural operations that impacted surface and groundwater. And through that effort, we worked with EPA, Department of Environmental Quality, NRCS, the LSU Ag Center, and the Department of Ag and Forestry. And again, it was a slow process at first, but then EPA said, okay, this is the way it's going to be, which means that they were going to come down with a regulatory program to fix the problem. Well, that got everybody's attention. And that brought people, again, to the table. And we worked out with EPA, which a lot of people didn't think we would be able to do, a sound voluntary program to address the water quality issues. And through this Master Farmer Program, and we feel like this program can be expanded to do the same thing with greenhouse gas emission reductions. That's our focus, and that's what we're looking at through this endeavor, is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The three big ones, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and then of course methane. And by putting together good sound best management practices, and Ernest hit upon that, agriculture, farmers and ranchers have been using these practices for a very long time. They have not been recognized or evaluated because they originally weren't designed, and I go back to the water quality part, to address greenhouse gas emissions. They were designed to address water quality issues. But the same practice will address greenhouse gas emissions. They just need to be recognized, and they need to be evaluated, and then they just need to be promoted. Through efforts like the Master Farmer Program, I think we can do that. But again, and I really don't like talking about forcing people to the table, but sometimes that's what it may take. And I want to go back to the Chief's comment earlier about planting the seed in our young people. And there's an old saying in the Extension Service in agriculture that you reach the adult through the child. And we haven't talked about it, and it's been mentioned just a couple of times, but I think, getting into our secondary education with this message about climate change, and just through osmosis, if nothing else, that message is going to go from that kid back to that parent. And that's all I have to comment on right now.
I'd like to add a little bit more to that if I could.
Absolutely.
I farmed for 39 years full-time, implementing as many of the conservation practices that I could in my farming operation. As a result, I became the first certified Louisiana Master Farmer in the state. When I retired from farming, I went to work with the LSU Ag Center and retired from them after 15 years, heading up the Louisiana Master Farmer program. I've been there on the farm doing it, and I'm still doing it, and I'm still trying to promote conservation. There are many, my statements are not to brag, but there are many, many farmers exactly like me that have done the same thing and are still doing the same thing. And if they are incentivized and approached in the right way, you're going to see more conservation being implemented on the farm and more efforts to store carbon. If you look, and I think I'm correct on this, agriculture can be the the largest organization or group to address climatic change, but it can't be done on their backs. It's going to have to be done through incentives and programs and support, and along with a little bit of recognition of the effort that's being done. I don't know how long you can live without food or water. And agriculture uses 60% of the water in the United States or more. So there's a huge stake with farmers and the production of food with just the one commodity of water. So I'm real happy with the progress that's being made in this initiative. I do think that we're going to have to go outside of our group and do a hell of a lot of outreach in the efforts in the communities and every opportunity to gain support out there in all the communities in the rural areas and in the cities. That effort needs to be made, and I think we're gonna accomplish that effort in the end. Thanks for letting me express my opinion.
No, thank you, Ernest, and you, Ron, as well. Those were such great points to raise. So I see when we take a step back and look at this section on motivating action, we've centralized around a few different ideas of increasing knowledge and partnerships, recognition in that, and then also incentives were a big idea that was raised, and then alongside the university partnerships. So are there any final thoughts if we take a step back and look at all four of these different buckets of increasing participation? Do you guys see any gaps here of other areas we need to focus on increasing participation? I'll pass it to Allison in a minute to do next steps, but just want to make sure we're not missing any big key components. We can also think on this too. No, these are big ideas.
Yeah, Lindsay, maybe I can run through kind of our big things that we've discussed, and then we can figure out if there are gaps after that.
That sounds great. I'm going to stop sharing so we can listen.
Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm Allison DeYoung from the Water Institute. Going back to our first topic, education and community engagement, I think some of the bigger concepts we talked about were adapting a model engagement program similar to LA Safe, trying to, determine ways to partner with organizations who are already working with fence line and tribal and frontline communities who have those trust relationships built already, and kind of developing a program that would allow for state resources to support ongoing engagement with those communities and bubbling those lessons up. We also talked about Bill's action that he's working on to provide a climate letter grade to the electric utilities and possibly other large industrial carbon emitters. And I know in a previous workshop this week, the issue of rating housing stock as well for climate efficiency and also came up. So I think those are pretty related. When we talked about technical support, we talked about expanding existing programs like the Incumbent Worker Training Program. We talked about getting a state energy plan that is under development right now so that we can access federal funds and coordinating among entities so that we can apply for that funding. We talked about getting, working through the community and technical college system to work with their demand forecasting system for jobs, so the STAR job system, and making sure that we're targeting need-based aid towards jobs that are being planned. And so forecasting those green jobs is going to be really important so that we can match need and training opportunities to those. We also talked about, I wanted to highlight something that came up in the chat that I don't think we really discussed a lot, but I think is really important, which is that to make sure we're training for the jobs that are coming, we have to ensure that there is certainty in new markets, which policies, requirements, and standards provide. And this is a place where I think the folks on this call should really think about how to incorporate and kind of work with those parallel pieces of other actions. So in places where we're thinking about new standards, new regulations, and new policies, we need to match that with the job opportunities, training opportunities, communication with communities, because those are the places where those two things meet, right? So I think that's a great opportunity to improve actions that maybe we didn't get to talk about specifically in this workshop, but that other workshops have touched on, and that you might be working on in your sector committees as well. On equitable access and implementation, we talked about community solar and improving kind of those efficiency programs as well that are managed at the utility scale. Talked about retrofits quite a bit, and using existing programs like the Weatherization Assistance Program, but also the challenge of scaling up those types of operations, making sure they reach renter households without being a giveaway to landlords and finding that balance there. We also talked about the need to coordinate and collaborate on affordable housing development and also transportation development, and making sure that the land use pieces are supporting the access to those jobs that and the housing stock as well. And we touched on air quality a little bit too. And I wanted to add that indoor air quality from stoves and things like that is also a key piece of respiratory health. And then finally, in our motivating action segment, we talked about partnering with local universities and groups on outreach. We talked specifically about incorporating HBCU research and outreach and kind of mapping what everyone is working on at the university level in climate, and using those relationships of trust to make sure that we're connecting that to community work. And we had a nice discussion on how to reach farmers and rural communities in particular, using examples like the Master Farmer Program that brought people to the table, and using conservation and extension services to bring those folks into the conversation and make sure that we're talking fully about the benefits of this work, and also emphasizing that we're all in it together, something I heard really loudly from this group. So if I missed anything, or if there's anything specific to an action that you're working on, or that you think is a component that we really need to emphasize, I think that's what I had from our discussion today.
Yes, Logan.
One thing I think is really important here for kind of a community understanding in general, that this is something that the state cares about, that leadership cares about and that people can see themselves in part of this transition into the future is that this effort of 18 months is not the one and done, that this isn't the end. In the same way that the Coastal Master Plan is a plan that has regular updates and that has input and buy-in and engagement across the board. And there's sort of a consistent understanding that we need to find money to make that happen. I think that's true of this as well. And so making sure that people understand that this isn't just we talked about it once and that's as good as it gets, but that this is a longer process. And then one other thing that is not associated with that, but that is, maybe it is, helping people again see themselves in this work and find a way to be in this work without saying that's over there for someone else. The barrier of entry is too high. Even thinking about things like training stipends for folks. Part of the barriers to engagement is if you've got economic instability, the focus is not how can I get involved in my community necessarily. It's how can I get food on the table? How do I get to next week? And so I'm not saying that they're mutually exclusive, but I'm saying we need to think really about helping people see themselves in this work and see a way into it in the various opportunities in jobs and training. So that's all.
Thanks, Logan, for raising that. Absolutely an important consideration.
And just to reiterate, it's been mentioned several times, I think in different ways, but plans and projects and new programs have better chances of being actually implemented when you have buy-in, right? And you're not going to have buy-in unless you're engaging people throughout. We don't want to wait till we've established the program and then ask people what they think about it. We want to engage people as best we can throughout the process of development, these ideas.
Absolutely, Monica. Both of you are so right in the comments that you made. It's not just about focusing on the action specifically. This is something Harry and I talk about a lot, but it's also bringing people into the process and why we've structured our process in this way, but still continue to see the need for engaging people in a more personal and community level as well. So I appreciate you guys bringing that into the fold. So a few more specific next steps I think that we can target moving forward. I would like to connect Logan and Craig and Dr. Lumnicki on some of those conversations with utility scale and retrofits and scaling up resources. Dr. Foster and Arthur, I believe you guys had the great idea around that, connecting universities around how we can engage communities in those resources. Possibly, Monica, you would be another great asset in those conversations. So I'd like to bring you guys together on that. And I think, I'm trying to think of a few other areas. On adapting this model similar to LA Safe, Logan, that's an area that you mentioned and expressed interest in. And Arthur, I believe you had some great ideas on building that. Yes,
and just
Monica.
to throw that out there, our group worked with others on LA Safe, and a lot of people on this call I know were involved, but we actually helped do the evaluation of that project. So I'm happy to share information we have from LA Safe as well.
That's great. That'd be great. So I'll connect you guys on that. And also, I would just say more broadly, this conversation has been really helpful to identify some of these ways that we can share with other groups too on what they're working through and ways to enhance the actions that they're developing, not just in picking apart these cross-sector areas. That's been very helpful in this conversation, but also Allison and I will synthesize notes and report back to you all, but also to our different groups on places where this can help them in putting forth new ideas. So I really appreciate all of you contributing so much to this discussion. And are there any final thoughts from you all? And I'll go to our public comment in a minute, but wanted to see if we missed anything. Okay, great. So with that, anyone who is in our attendee list and would like to raise a comment or an idea, please just raise a hand and I'll promote you to be a panelist. I'll also check our climate email for any written comments that we have received. I see a raised hand from Jonathan Leo, and I'm going to enable you to join us.
Thank you very much. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, Jonathan.
I'm relatively new to Louisiana. I'm an environmental lawyer, licensed in California. I've gotten involved with the Greater New Orleans Interfaith Climate Coalition since I've been in Baton Rouge for the past 6-7 months or so. I also worked when I was living in Lincoln, Nebraska with the Lincoln Mayor's Climate Initiative Task Force to develop a climate action plan for the city of Lincoln, Nebraska. And I'm very impressed with the range of different people's expertise and engagement in this process here in Louisiana. One thing that's very central to my work is environmental assessment work, environmental impact analysis work. Which is inherently interdisciplinary. And as interdisciplinary as there are issues that affect any particular project that is being considered for development at any level by any public agency. And the benefit of that, and obviously it comes out of the federal National Environmental Policy Act, but there are a number of states that have those processes as well, and some cities too, is that whenever any kind of activity is being proposed, that a public agency must buy off on, approve in some way, you determine whether or not, with an initial questionnaire covering virtually every field that this climate task force, for instance, itself covers with the personnel and expertise that it has, are there going to be potentially negative adverse impacts environmentally or in health areas from this action? And you basically, to use an odd word, troll every possible interest group and every possible area of expertise, public, private, etc., that has any engagement in this particular activity, and learn whether or not you need to dig deeper in certain areas. And you also build community and build engagement in this process, as well as identifying environmental impacts that you need to address, because you find people who have interests and expertise and concerns with a project that you might not otherwise find. I don't know if Louisiana or any of the cities or parishes in Louisiana have any kind of requirement for that kind of environmental impact assessment process in public agency permit and activity approvals, but I'm putting it out there because I found a lot of receptivity to that in the other places I've worked in climate action, as a way to engage community and as a way to identify issues and build multidisciplinary engagement in resolving conflicts. So thank you for allowing me to have a moment here.
Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us from all the way from Nebraska. Well, now that you've moved here, it's great to hear from you. I also see a hand raised from Jane, and I see your written comment as well, so I'll let you speak that. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you. My plan is just to read my written comment. Dear committee members, the looming climate crisis in Louisiana is not inevitable. We have the power, the technology, and the growing political will to collectively address this problem now, using tools that are already available to us. It will require us confronting truths uncomfortable for our business sector, and will require significant support and participation from the entire public. To promote public participation on these important matters, we will also need to be tackling head-on intersecting problems that overlap with our actions to address climate. For instance, Louisiana's people need guaranteed housing, food, clean water, and healthcare, both because these are human rights, but also because a guarantee of basic needs would certainly boost participation in policy conversations. Louisiana's government needs to undertake significant support for the ground level nonprofit and community organizations who are doing the frontline engagement, education, and support. Funding and policy advocacy priority needs to be given to these organizations. And people and welfare need to be prioritized in the final outcomes recommended by this task force to the governor. Furthermore, if public participation was actually a priority for this task force, you would not be holding an average of 6 hours of meetings per week, back to back, and all during business hours with very little notice. I have taken it on, along with several colleagues, to specifically encourage public participation in this process from people already engaged on climate issues, and we are finding it nearly impossible because of the daunting meeting schedule and expectations. In fact, for the people who are being affected first and worst by the already changing climate, making their voices heard in this process is basically completely off the table. The state of Louisiana has 4 million residents. There are 8 public participants on this meeting right now. That is not enough. I am, in fact, missing the second half of another meeting on the global climate demand actions happening next week in order to be here to deliver this comment. We appreciate the steps that have been taken so far to improve scheduling and transparency in response to public comments like this one, but it's still not truly supportive of public participation or access. We need to be doing so much more. Thank you for having important discussions on.
Jane, I think we might have lost you at the end of your comment.
Oh, that was it. I'm sorry. I was saying that's it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jane, for raising those comments. We appreciate the feedback from you. Members, I would also like to raise, I don't see any more hands raised on the attendee list, but just wanted to raise a few comments that were noted in the chat throughout this meeting. There was one from the Capital Region Planning Commission who noted, also it could be good to consider education efforts for state and parish employees who will be tasked with implementing climate actions and or who may be reviewing local efforts related to climate. If those staffers are not building in their programs to be able to receive and understand the ask of on-the-ground communities, then it's likely the ask may be turned down simply because the staffers aren't up to speed on climate actions and strategies. The Association of Climate Change Officers partners with states to develop certification programs for climate change professionals, and this has become a part of the hiring and employment process in Maryland, where employees with certain positions are required and strongly encouraged to have this professional certification. And the comment goes on that this is just one example, not necessarily advocating for that program, but that was a great comment to raise. And then a comment also from Terrence Chambers that UL Lafayette is ready to contribute with education, workforce development, and outreach related to all renewable energy topics, but especially solar energy. We're very willing to collaborate with industry and our communities and technical college colleagues on these efforts. So possibly it would be great to connect Terry with the group of Craig, Logan, and Arthur who noted interest in that. So I think those are a few great comments I wanted to raise. And members, if there are no further comments, I think we're ready to disband. Only 2 minutes over our time. Thank you all for coming today, and I hope you have a great Friday.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.